When we think about discipline, most people associate it with pressure, control, or restriction. They think of it as something forced upon them, a rigid system that steals their comfort. But in truth, discipline is not punishment. It is an expression of self-respect. It is how you communicate with yourself through action, not words. Every time you choose consistency over laziness, focus over distraction, and long-term growth over short-term comfort, you are saying to yourself, I am worthy of my own effort. Discipline is the language through which your soul tells your body, I respect the life I have been given. Discipline begins in the moment you stop defending your limitations. Every person carries an inner dialogue that often stands between intention and action. You tell yourself you want to change. You promise that this time will be different. But when the moment of effort arrives, the mind begins to negotiate. It says, I'm too tired. I'll do it later. Today isn't the right day. Those sentences are the language of excuses. And every time you believe them, you weaken your willpower. Discipline is born when you finally recognize this voice for what it is. Fear disguised as comfort. You begin to understand that progress will never come from a life lived only in comfort. The body grows through strain, the mind through challenge, and the soul through perseverance. To practice discipline is to accept discomfort as the price of growth. When you stop running from that truth, a quiet strength begins to form within you. Excuses are seductive because they protect you from responsibility. They allow you to stay within the boundaries of what is easy, convincing you that you are safe there. But safety without growth slowly becomes suffocation. The human spirit is not designed for stagnation. It is designed for expansion. Every time you act despite your excuses, you take a small step beyond the walls of your comfort. That step may seem insignificant in the moment, but over time it becomes the bridge between who you are and who you wish to be. Discipline is that bridge, the connection between potential and realization. Without it, dreams remain as fantasies that fade with time. With it, even the smallest consistent actions transform into monumental change. To live a disciplined life is to choose freedom over fear, because you are no longer controlled by moods, laziness, or hesitation. There is a deep honesty required for discipline to take root. You must look at yourself without denial, without justification, and without pretending. This self-honesty is painful, but it is the foundation of transformation. When you tell yourself, I didn't have time, you are lying. What you truly mean is, I didn't make it a priority. When you say I couldn't, what you often mean is, I chose not to. The moment you start admitting these truths to yourself, you take back your power. Discipline is the act of no longer deceiving yourself with easy explanations. It is the courage to face the gap between your intentions and your actions, and then to close that gap through consistency. This is not a single decision, but a daily one. The decision to show up even when the feeling isn't there. Feelings fluctuate, but discipline endures. When you choose discipline over excuses, something beautiful happens inside you. Trust begins to grow. You start to trust yourself again. Many people live in quiet disappointment with themselves because they've broken too many promises made in private. They say they will wake early, train, study, create. And when they don't, a small fracture forms in their self-respect. Over time, those fractures turn into self-doubt. But when you follow through even on small things, you repair those cracks, you rebuild your integrity. You begin to believe your own word again. And this belief gives rise to confidence. Not the loud confidence that seeks validation, but the silent kind that carries peace. Discipline in its purest form is self-trust made visible. Ultimately, discipline begins where excuses end, because excuses are the language of fear, and discipline is the language of respect. You respect yourself enough to do what must be done even when it's difficult. You respect your future enough to sacrifice temporary comfort. And you respect your life enough to not waste it on hesitation. Every time you resist an excuse and choose action, you are affirming your strength. You are telling yourself, I am not my laziness, I am not my doubt. I am the one who decides. This simple realization changes everything. It transforms your attitude, your energy, and your destiny. Discipline does not demand perfection, it demands persistence, and persistence, when guided by awareness, becomes the path to mastery. So when the next excuse appears, smile at it, recognize it, and walk past it, for that is the very moment discipline begins. True discipline is not a prison, it is liberation. Many people confuse discipline with restriction. They think that to be disciplined means to live a life without joy, to deny oneself the pleasures of freedom. But this is a misunderstanding born from the ego's fear of structure. In truth, discipline is not about limiting your life. It is about expanding your capacity to live it fully. When you are disciplined, you free yourself from the chaos of indecision and the burden of inconsistency. You no longer waste energy wondering whether you will act, because you already know you will. That quiet certainty is what gives peace to the disciplined mind. It is not rigidity, it is alignment. You are no longer pulled in every direction by mood or temptation. Instead, your actions arise from clarity, and that clarity becomes power. Freedom without direction is chaos. It may feel exhilarating for a short time, but it soon leads to emptiness and disorder. When there is no guiding structure, life becomes a collection of random impulses. Moments without meaning, effort without purpose. Discipline provides the container within which freedom can express itself meaningfully. It gives your energy a form, your time a rhythm, and your intentions a path. Think of water. It is soft, flexible, and free. But without a container, it has no shape and no purpose. When discipline becomes your container, your freedom flows within it with strength and beauty. The more disciplined you are, the more powerfully you can direct your freedom. Without it, you are free only to drift. With it, you are free to arrive. There is also a sacred balance between discipline and freedom. Too much discipline without understanding becomes control, and too much freedom without awareness becomes waste. The key lies in harmony, where discipline is not a punishment, but conscious choice. When you wake up early to meditate, when you train your body, when you study, even when tired, these are not acts of self-denial, they are acts of devotion. You are devoting time and energy to something greater than comfort, to growth, clarity, and mastery. The person who sees discipline as restriction has not yet experienced its depth. The person who embraces discipline as devotion begins to feel an inner expansion, a sense that life itself is responding to their effort. When your actions align with purpose, even the hardest routines feel like liberation. A disciplined life creates inner order. It builds a silent structure inside you that makes everything else flow naturally. You begin to notice that your mind becomes calmer because you are no longer negotiating with yourself. When you decide to act, you act. When you rest fully without guilt. This balance is rare in the modern world because most people live in the extremes, either indulgence or deprivation, either chaos or rigidity. Discipline brings you to the middle path. It teaches you when to push and when to pause. It allows you to live with intention instead of reaction. And from this state of intention comes a deeper sense of inner freedom. A freedom not from rules, but from inner conflict. Discipline begins to shape a person's destiny, the moment it transforms from an external rule into an internal value. In the beginning, many people force discipline upon themselves like a burden. They follow routines out of obligation, not understanding. But when awareness enters this process, discipline evolves. It stops being something you do. It becomes something you are. It is no longer about forcing yourself to act, but about aligning with what truly matters. The difference is profound. When you act out of force, you create resistance. When you act out of alignment, you create flow. Discipline that arises from awareness feels effortless because it is connected to purpose. You no longer see it as restriction. It becomes the natural rhythm of a mind that respects itself. The morning ritual, the mindful meal, the hours of practice, they all become acts of harmony, not obligation. This shift marks the beginning of true mastery, because what once required effort now becomes your nature. When you live with awareness, you begin to see how undisciplined habits quietly drain your energy. Every distraction, every delay, every promise broken to yourself scatters a part of your attention. Over time, this fragmentation weakens the mind. It becomes restless, unfocused, and easily disturbed. Awareness reveals this pattern with clarity, and that clarity becomes your teacher. You start to recognize that discipline is not just about doing more, it's about doing what truly matters. It's about removing the unnecessary and protecting what gives you strength. When you make this realization, you begin to simplify your life. You stop chasing every impulse, you stop feeding every thought, you stop wasting energy on things that do not serve your growth. The mind that practices discipline with awareness becomes sharper, more grounded, and deeply peaceful because it no longer wastes its power. It conserves it, and where energy is conserved, clarity expands. True awareness-based discipline also teaches humility. When you practice it sincerely, you begin to understand your limitations, how easily you can be distracted, how quickly you can fall into old patterns. But instead of feeling guilt, you feel understanding. Awareness doesn't punish, it illuminates. You start to see that discipline is not about being perfect, it is about being conscious. You fail, but you return. You fall, but you rise again. Each time you return, the gap between failure and correction becomes smaller. That gap is where awareness grows. This process builds inner strength, not because you never fall, but because you no longer stay down. You begin to realize that every disciplined act is a form of meditation, an opportunity to bring the mind back to the present. And with each return, your respect for yourself deepens because you are proving that you are willing to face your own weakness and transform it. The most beautiful transformation happens when discipline becomes love. Awareness shows you that discipline is not a punishment for imperfection. It is an expression of care. You keep your word to yourself because you value your own peace. You train your body because you respect the temple that carries your spirit. You study, meditate, and grow because you honor the potential that life has given you. This kind of discipline does not create tension. It creates fulfillment. It fills your days with purpose and your actions with depth. You begin to feel that everything you do, from the smallest act of mindfulness to the greatest act of perseverance, becomes a form of respect for life itself. And in that realization, you find that discipline and awareness are not two separate paths. They are one and the same, both leading to the same destination, the quiet dignity of a mind that truly knows itself. Discipline and self-respect are deeply intertwined, like two roots of the same tree, feeding each other in silence without discipline. Self-respect slowly fades because promises made to oneself remain unfulfilled and without self-respect. Discipline cannot exist because one cannot commit to what one does not value. Every time you keep your word to rise early, to complete your training, to speak truthfully, to remain patient, you are sending a message to your own spirit. I can rely on myself. This reliability builds self-respect. It's not about achieving perfection, but about nurturing consistency. The mind learns that your words are sacred and your actions follow them with loyalty. Over time, this alignment between word and action becomes a quiet source of pride. Not the loud, boastful kind that seeks validation, but the inner pride of integrity. Discipline is therefore not about control, it is about honoring the trust you build with yourself. When you lose discipline, you also lose faith in your own strength. Each time you break a promise to yourself, no matter how small, it leaves a scar on your confidence. You begin to doubt your ability to follow through. You say to yourself, tomorrow I will start. But deep down you no longer believe your own words. This quiet disappointment is heavier than failure because it breeds hopelessness. You stop trusting your potential. The way back begins with one disciplined act, one kept promise. Perhaps it is waking up at the time you said you would, or meditating even when the mind resists. These small victories matter. They are not just actions, they are healing. They repair the inner bond that's broken. As you repeat these actions, you rediscover something profound, that you are capable of being your own source of stability. And when you become stable within, the world outside loses its power to shake you. Self-respect is the foundation of dignity. When discipline is absent, people often seek respect from others through praise, attention, or success. But this kind of respect is fragile because it depends on external approval. True self-respect is different. It is earned through silent discipline when no one is watching. It grows in those early hours when you choose effort over comfort, in those quiet moments when you restrain your anger, in those decisions where you act with integrity even when it costs you something. Every time you honor your principles in solitude, you strengthen the roots of your self-worth. Discipline gives you this unshakable foundation. It tells the world, and more importantly yourself, that your values are not negotiable. You begin to move with calm confidence, not because you need to prove yourself, but because you already know who you are. When discipline becomes a reflection of self-respect, life transforms from chaos into clarity. You stop chasing fleeting pleasures because you realize they cost you your peace. You stop arguing with your weaknesses and start training them into strengths. The disciplined person is not a rigid one. They are free because their actions come from respect, not compulsion. They live in alignment. Their thoughts, words, and actions all move in the same direction. This alignment creates a deep sense of harmony, both within and without. You begin to see that discipline is not a restriction on your freedom, but the very essence of it. Because when you respect yourself enough to live with discipline, you no longer need validation, and you no longer crave shortcuts, and you no longer fear failure. You simply walk your path with patience, with balance, and with quiet pride in the strength of your own character. When you understand that discipline is a lifelong practice, not a temporary effort, your relationship with it begins to mature. Most people see discipline as something they must force upon themselves for a short period, a diet, a project, a routine, a resolution. They push hard for a while and then collapse under the weight of their own expectations. But discipline in its true essence is not about intensity. It is about consistency. It is not about a sudden burst of effort. It is about steady commitment. Like breathing, it must become part of your life, not a task you pick up and put down. When you see discipline as a rhythm instead of a rule, it stops feeling like pressure and begins to feel like harmony. Each act of discipline, waking early, exercising, meditating, studying, becomes a single beat in the rhythm of your existence. Over time, this rhythm aligns your mind, body, and spirit into one continuous flow of awareness. You begin to live not through willpower alone, but through understanding, through balance, through respect for the process itself. A disciplined life is not a life without joy. It is a life where joy is earned through effort. When you commit to a path with patience, life rewards you with a sense of inner satisfaction that instant pleasures can never provide. The joy of discipline is not loud. It does not shout or demand recognition. It whispers quietly within you, reminding you that you are growing even if no one sees it. This joy is rooted in fulfillment, not in fleeting pleasure. The person who practices lifelong discipline begins to appreciate small, simple victories. They take pride in showing up and doing what they said they would do in the peace that follows completion. Over time, the external rewards of success, praise, wealth, admiration begin to feel secondary. The real reward becomes the state of mind that discipline cultivates, calm, capable, and deeply grounded. Discipline becomes the invisible teacher that shapes your character every single day. As discipline becomes your lifelong companion, it evolves into wisdom. You begin to see that discipline is not something separate from spirituality, mindfulness, or peace. It is the path that leads to them. Through discipline you learn patience. Through patience you learn awareness. And through awareness you learn freedom. You realize that discipline was never about controlling life, but about cooperating with it. It was never about fighting yourself, but about guiding yourself. And in that realization, discipline becomes love. Love for the person you are becoming, love for the life you are creating, love for the moments you are truly living. Every day becomes a chance to recommit, to refine, to respect yourself a little more. Discipline is not the end of freedom. It is the foundation of it. It is the silent vow between you and your higher self to keep walking, to keep growing, and to keep living in alignment with what you truly